ZombieTech. It all hinges on me. Okay.
Push the button.
Welcome to ZombieTech, a forum for engineers, scientists, and inventors to ponder on the technologies needed to survive the inevitable zombie apocalypse.
She's Addie.
He's Whisker.
On the line today, we have the one and only Mark VandeWettering of the Brainwagon blog.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello. You've gotten that.
I can't do it like Addie. I'm sorry.
Good try, though.
So before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, I just want to introduce Mark to anybody who doesn't know who he is. Mark does some fancy coding stuff for some company you might have heard of. I don't know.
Yeah, I work for Pixar.
Yeah.
We'll get that out of the way.
So
I neither speak for them nor can they hold me responsible for anything I might say, though. So.
I find it interesting that Mark's works there, but I find his hobbies far more interesting, personally.
Yep. You've got quite a few under your belt.
Yeah, I do a few little things. Just to toss a few subjects out there. I mean, obviously, I met you guys mostly through my sort of tinkering with electronics and amateur radio in particular. I've sort of gotten more into that lately. In the past, I've sort of done more telescope making. I helped teach a class in telescope making at Chabot Observatory in Oakland, and for a while until life intervened, basically. So I built a few of those, and I just like to build stuff and to tinker, and I read a great deal and enjoy science and engineering in general, and enjoy science and scientists and engineers a great deal. But also sort of like the intersection of that with arts like music and other things, even though I'm not very musical myself. But that's sort of the baseline, I think.
Oh no, you got some techno in the making. The Brainwagon. I dig it. Yeah. I dig it.
Any music I make is purely accidental, I suspect, or at least purely algorithmic. I've often teased other people that music is a great influence on people and particularly on their emotional state, and that seems to be absent in me to a great deal. But I do appreciate sort of where I actually think music is interesting is in the performance part of it and in sort of the technology and the techniques that people employ to make music. I think that appeals to me sort of more than the end product. And that's true of a lot of things, I guess. Sort of the process that you go through to make stuff, I think is more interesting. Well, obviously, that's true because most of the projects I do are completely pointless from a pragmatic standpoint. Most will not save us from the oncoming zombie apocalypse, but anyway.
Well, the telescope making, that's definitely...
Well, we might be able to see them coming from far away. That would be good.
And, there you go. And your laser transmission, maybe we can make that into like a laser zombie killer?
Yeah,
with a scope on
quite
top?
A bit of power. I mean, you probably could just burn them if you had that much power. But
there you go.
The thing that... there certainly was a cross-fertilization of interests and skills. I've been sort of toying with the idea of doing a long-distance LED-based light transmitter, and I posted a few little baby steps toward that on my blog. And I certainly have a lot of optical crap lying around. I have some spare 8-inch mirrors that would work really great as collimators and would help concentrate light and would hopefully boost the range significantly. So, you never know when you set out to learn something, you never really know when it's going to pay off in doing something completely different. And certainly that's true with the telescope stuff. So
very cool. How did you decide to make a laser transmitter? Because I know we've done some work with that too, but that was...
He was mostly working on an LED transmitter. I think the laser version that he did was sort of incidental because it.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of hard to pin down. I mean, I've obviously been interested in light communication. A lot of these projects that I'm doing now. I mean, I'm in my late 40s now, and a lot of these projects are projects that I've maybe are in my head for 30 years. And just now I'm sort of reaching the point where you have enough disposable income and maybe enough time and enough sort of know-how and just enough, I don't know what the timing really is about. But you finally just have enough incentive to actually try them out. And I call it kind of boldly going where everyone has gone before, because a lot of them are just copies of stuff, but you're doing it yourself. It's like building a telescope isn't difficult, but most people don't build them, and
Says you.
I think that you learn something about stuff when you actually do it yourself. And so the light-based stuff, I've been interested in, obviously, optics and telescopes and light and lasers and all that kind of stuff for years and years and years. I remember probably even 10 years ago reading a ham K3 PGP has a nice optical communication page where he talks about his experiments with LEDs and with lasers. The cheap availability of these high power Cree LEDs has made it even more attractive, because now you can get, I've got some 1 watt ones that I picked up from Deal Extreme for $3 a piece or something. They're really, really bright. They work really, really well. So those used to be 10 years ago, even probably impossible to get anything with that kind of power.
Right.
Now it's something you just order off the web and delivers to you in 3 or 4 days. And,
Right. Right. Oh, that's true.
That's cool.
Availability does help.
So it wasn't too long ago that I got my first ultra bright blue LED, and it cost me, $16.
Yeah,
It's not even that many years ago.
Yeah, I got a package of white ones from Tata for 4 cents a piece. Little LEDs. So they're, the internet has been a great. I mean, obviously, the way I know you guys is through the internet. The ability of the internet to allow hobbyists to communicate has been really, really amazing, and I think it's sort of bringing about a sort of golden age of tinkering now, where people can. I spend a lot of time on the web every day, just looking at projects that people have done and just trying to. I spend too much time probably, because if I didn't spend less time looking at what everybody else has done, maybe I'd do some more of my own. But it's amazing to see what people are doing out there, and inspiring, and I think that also helps. It's why I continue to do my blog, is to just sort of try to throw out there some of the things that I do and some of the things that I like to do, and get people thinking about it. There's nothing that I do that other people can do. It's just a fun way to spend time. It beats watching television too.
Oh yeah.
There's an interesting dynamic in this little community that we've got going, where one person will get a fun idea and they'll sort of, try a little bit into it, and then somebody else will be like, "Oh, I always wondered how to do that first bit, and I've got a good idea for the second bit."
Yeah, exactly. It's all sort of building on what other people. I think the hardest thing sometimes, just particularly when you're a novice, is just trying to get that first project done. That first, get the incentive to actually, buy the soldering iron and start putting together your first circuit, or, getting enough experience to actually complete your first telescope. And I think that's really kind of the fun part of it. There are obviously always people who are more experienced, more intelligent than you, working on stuff. So but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be, and that you shouldn't be using opportunities to learn. But it's discouraging sometimes to have a high failure rate and to not know really what you're doing. And it always helps. There's obviously a lot of people on the web whose blogs I read and follow, and I just admire them greatly for the work that they do, and the work that you guys do with the organs and with the SIDCOG and stuff, I think is really, really cool, and I think it's a perfect blend of sort of, some of what you do is mechanical restoration, some of what you do is programming, some of what you do is new electronics tinkering. I think that's great stuff. And
I know what you mean with the failure rate and the other people being smarter, because when we first started putting up our videos, our first couple of people who started paying attention to us were like this guy that works at Pixar, Jerry Ellsworth, Darren Kitchen from the Hack 5 TV show. It was just like this A-list of people who I look up to, and they're all watching what I'm doing, and I'm like, oh, crap.
No, that's totally cool though. I mean, Jerry certainly. I've met Jerry a couple times, and she might even remember who I am. You know, she's one of these people who I think is just enormously talented and almost exclusively self-taught and really motivated and really interesting person to deal with. She could talk every day for 30 years and I probably wouldn't be able to understand. She's really, really good. and not that there aren't topics that I understand perhaps better than the average person, but obviously working at Pixar, you would expect me to know something, but Jerry's really cool, and I really like the projects, and I really like her approach, and I think actually her influence on me is mostly in the way that she's tried to use the social media to sort of get her message out, and if she indeed has a message, she might deny that she has one, but I think that if we had more people sort of putting themselves out there and talking about projects at the level that she can do, I think the world would be a better place, and we really have to sort of I grew up kind of as a computer nerd, and I think for the most part that's been really good for me. And when you're in, I think I'm sometimes really concerned about kids in general, because I think that nerds aren't quite as big of a stigma as they used to be, or geeks, but I would just like to recommend to them, if this is the kind of stuff that you're interested in, if you're interested in building and studying and working on stuff, continue to do it, because it does pay off in the long run. I think I know a lot of people who've turned that sort of early awkwardness perhaps into better lifestyles, and we're going to survive the zombie apocalypse.
We are.
So. Ultimately, brute force will only get you through so many zombies. You got to have a plan. So.
Now, I was under the impression that your plan sort of involved two steps. One was having more money than everyone else, and two was having a larger vehicle than everyone else. So
there's this plan has evolved somewhat. I mean. Let's see, how can I express this without getting myself in too much trouble? Certainly having more money than everybody else, I'm only sort of, that could require some more success. But I do have a nice big Ford Expedition that could drive over burning Priuses and zombie apocalypse, and that would be good. I might run out of gas 5 miles inside the border, but I don't know exactly how this is really going to play out. I do know somebody who bought a dirt bike especially for this, to escape.
Oh my
we
gosh.
don't worry so much about zombies as earthquakes in my area. And he thought it would be great to have a dirt bike so that you could escape the devastation zone if there were an earthquake. But we haven't had a good strong one to test this theory yet, so we'll see how it goes. But
one of
in
those
general,
sort
I think,
of things where you don't want to have to test it.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we will. My house is actually located in the double black skull and crossbones zone for the Hayward Fault, and I think if I live here long enough, something will shake loose. But at least we don't have. I'm not in any hurricane or flood risk at all, and every place has its disadvantages.
It's risks. Sure.
Yeah, even here in the middle of Minnesota, we went on a canoe trip this past weekend, and while we were going along there, we saw all sorts of interesting stuff hanging from trees because the river had flooded very, very badly earlier in the year. We saw somebody's porch was sitting up in a tree, probably 15, 20 feet off the water level. It's like, wow.
Yeah, water is actually the thing that scares me the most, I think, because, it seems that every time I've ever gone on a rafting trip, it's ended with me nearly dying in some horrible way. So I'm not a huge rafting fan anymore. It seems like every time I go, it's just absolute chaos and craziness, and involves me either outside the boat or upside down inside a boat or something. It's just complete chaos. But yeah, so I fear things like flooding and things way more than even earthquakes.
Or zombies.
Because
zombies and flooding are related because if nobody's paying attention to the hydroelectric power plants, those dams, if you're not controlling the gates correctly, they break.
It's true.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Well, let's see.
Wow.
Actually, I do live fairly close to a dam that they're currently reinforcing for earthquake.
Oh my god.
Currently.
It's been a project for the last couple of years. They decided that if a 7.0 or something hit, it could liquefy the base of the dam, and it wouldn't actually reach my house, but it would cut off my way to get out of my house. So I'm kind of glad they're doing that.
Maybe you need a boat too.
Yeah, or a hang glider or something. I don't know. We'll have to. You always have to evaluate what you're doing versus how much it costs and what are the likelihoods.
Right.
I think zombie apocalypse is probably it's probably slightly more likely than actually me being drowned or anything. So we'll have to figure it out.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I don't know either. Who can tell?
I think like an old Korean War era 086, or sometimes referred to as Loach helicopter, just a little 2-seat helicopter would probably be a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah, I have a feeling my homeowners association would bitch me for the front yard, though. I'm just guessing. If any of my homeowners association are listening, just kidding. Don't
love
hurt
everybody.
me, please.
So besides the laser transmitter or the LED/laser transmitter, any other projects that you've got on the queue?
That's sort of one that I've been thinking of. I actually spent the last couple of days thinking about this. I think John mentioned a 7400 logic contest that's coming. Mm-hmm. I actually have a brief idea, which I'm not quite ready to talk about yet, but I've been thinking about that a little bit. Okay. The reality is I'm still kind of busy. Life is still intervening. I've had some, I don't really want to talk about my personal life, but I've had a few things happen in the last few weeks. My son is actually back from Kyrgyzstan just yesterday, in fact, which is good. Congratulations. I'm very proud of my son. He's a U.S. Army airman. Yeah. Or U.S. Air Force. God, I can't even talk this morning. Sorry, Adam, if you're listening to this. I know he gets pissed off when I say things like that. But he won't listen. It's okay. He was stationed in Kyrgyzstan for 4 months or so. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to go out and see him. So I may not get a lot of hacking done. I've been trying to do some more recordings of the AMSAT 1. Mm-hmm. When it first went up, it was spinning pretty badly. So this is one of my other brief intro for people who don't follow my blog and aren't necessarily plugged in. AMSAT is a satellite that was hurled off of the International Space Station during a spacewalk about a month ago.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. There's an astronaut banging it around, cosmonaut actually, banging it around, and then just sort of on cue throws it off the space station, and it's sort of the size of a briefcase or so, and
that's it.
Yeah, it's not really huge. It's just a little satellite.
I thought it was much
and
bigger.
It's got a voice transmitter that transmits FM on memory serves 145.950 megahertz or whatever in the 2-meter band, which is real popular. And it's also got a different telemetry channel, and it was supposed to have a transponder so you could actually send signals through it and use it to communicate to other people. They had one antenna was damaged, so that still works, but only sort of partially. Anyway, when it first came out, it was spinning pretty badly, and that meant that the signals would fade and come back in every 6 seconds or so as it spun. But now the spin seems to have settled down a lot, so we're getting much better signals, much more consistent signals from it. And I hadn't really been following it too much, but I decided to start doing that. I'm trying to get some good slow scan television images. They usually transmit about 3 per pass. And for whatever reason, I seem to be always getting it pointing at the sky or at the sun or something. They're not really been all that exciting.
I noticed that the higher quality ones tend to be pointing away more often than not. Does that have anything to do with that antenna being broken on it?
No, the antenna should actually be the satellite should have stabilized in a position where the antennas are sort of the main lobe of the antenna is aimed down toward the Earth, and it should be relatively stationary. The same face should point toward the Earth. more or less consistently. They do have cameras mounted on the side. I mean, there's cameras on all three axes, and they transmit them in sort of well, if there is a pattern, I don't know what it is. And they occasionally also insert a sort of ROMmed picture of just RSS1 or ARISAT1 or whatever the picture shows. It's a yellow background with a blue satellite on it. That always seems to come out really, really good, in spite of the fact it's the least interesting picture you could possibly have, right? I'd really rather have pictures of the Earth or something. So I'm hoping to get some good ones. There's a 60-degree pass, which should be a nice long pass coming up the next day, and then I think there's a 70-degree, and so I'm hoping to get a few good recordings in this week.
Now,
I really like the whole. I've been involved, not so much lately, but I spend a lot of time doing handheld operation of satellites. There's a satellite called AO51, which has been up for quite a while now, that allows you to talk through the satellite to other people. And I've had communications with my little walkie-talkie and handheld antenna for out to about, I think, 2,500 miles, 2,800 miles, something like that, with just...
And this is why Mark is definitely a member of our zombie apocalypse survival team.
Yeah, the zombies will have a hard time bringing down the satellite, but they're not super reliable, though, unfortunately. AO51, I think, is reaching the end of its life. It's had a number of down periods where they've had to reset it from the ground station operation, and if the zombies get those guys, then it may not stay up all that long. But certainly there are other radio opportunities. Obviously disaster preparedness is sort of one of the big mantras of amateur radio. And to be honest, I'm not actually all that into it for that reason. I kind of like the electronics and sort of sciencey aspects of amateur radio more than that. But it probably, I keep the batteries topped off on my radios, and they could prove to be interesting in times of disaster.
A lot of that might have to do with your plan involves running over the people that are first responding.
Yeah, I mean, every man for himself. So no, I'm much nicer than that. I wouldn't run over people unless they really deserved it.
Nice qualification.
Well, not everybody's. It's still early in the morning here, people, in case. I usually am not quite so bad. But
so what does it take to record, like, say, the ARISAT? Because I know you've had some videos where you're sitting in a lawn chair with an antenna, but I don't know what all you've got.
Okay, so the setup that I've been using, if I'm not transmitting, if I'm just recording a satellite, the easiest way for me to do that and to get a good quality recording is I basically just take the speaker jack from the radio, and I just pipe that into my laptop. So I use I can sometimes use my Windows laptop. I sometimes use my Mac, but almost always just running Audacity. Just make sure that I get the levels roughly correct, and then just sit out there and do it. If I'm transmitting, like if I'm operating on AO51 where I'm actually transmitting, I kind of run out of hands to run a laptop. So what I typically do for that is I have so one hand holds the antenna, the other hand holds the walkie-talkie, and I have a splitter so that it can go to earphones. You don't want to use out to the speaker, because then you can get feedback, because I have a full duplex system, so you don't want to have feedback going back up to the satellite again of the signal that you have. So you put on earphones. So I have a splitter that goes to earbuds, and then the other half goes to a little digital voice recorder. So I just start that at the beginning and then put it in my pocket, and then I can operate the radio with two hands. Some people set up antenna or tripods to hold the antenna and steer it. I find it's easiest just to use just to hand hold it.
Interesting.
And the only thing you need to know, so the other part of that is you need to know when and where to point the satellite. So normally what I do is beforehand, I just look up, I have some software that I wrote, but there's also online. Heavens Above does a pretty good job, and actually AMSAT has a good page for satellite prediction. And it'll tell you what time and what direction the satellite comes up and how high it reaches, and then what direction it goes when it goes down and what time that is. So you just kind of use your watch and you just kind of guess where the satellite is. And a lot of times you just, by just waving the antenna around, you can find exactly where it is, and you just track it slowly by hand. It's not anything rocket
you don't have like
science-y.
a protractor or something measuring the angle or anything like that?
No, it's the I use a popular antenna for handheld satellite work called a Arrow antenna. They're manufactured. I made antennas that do a similar thing, but I tend to use the Arrow a lot. And the accuracy you need is only like within 20 degrees or so. So it's really not.
So that's
the lobe
quite
is pretty
an
gentle.
angle. Yeah.
And actually that's good because it means you can find the satellite pretty quickly. You don't have to, it's not like aiming your satellite dish or something like that where you need to really be careful and stuff.
Huh. Cool.
So
I've done that before. Direct TV dish back in the day. It's actually more difficult than you think.
Yeah, because the beam width of those things is only like 2 degrees or something. So if you're not really targeted on the geostationary satellite that you're aiming at, you don't get a good signal, and it's often hard to just find it. Just to get exactly located to where you want to be. That's the good part about these things is the power levels are such that there's plenty of power. Certainly, signals from the ISS are really strong, but even AO51 is really quite strong. And actually, Aerosat 1 has been really, really strong. I haven't had any problem at all tracking that. So
the voice channel on it seems like it's really clear.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good. If you go back through some of my older posts, you can find recordings that I did of AO51 or another satellite I use quite a bit is SO50 or AO27. These are all assigned numbers by AMSAT, so they have 2 letters usually and then 2 digits to identify it. Anyway, they're all pretty reasonably strong, and with a modest handheld antenna and a walkie-talkie, you can work any of those. They call them easy sats because they're actually really easy to do. Some of the other satellites require more complicated equipment. They transmit in single sideband or Morse code CW, and those generally you have to be able to track in frequency in real time, and kind of a pain. Yeah. I haven't really got a setup good enough to operate those myself, but I have a lot of fun with the easy sats and just tracking. There are a lot of little sats that just put out beacons of various kinds and stuff, and I've had fun just monitoring those. It's kind of a weird hobby, but
now is it possible to hear satellites through like SDR radio?
Oh yeah, sure. I have the
but...
FunCube dongle, which I haven't actually used a great deal. I was thinking about trying to get it up and running this week because it would be kind of fun to record more of the Aerosat transmits not only this narrow beacon or this FM beacon, but also other data. And if I could record a big chunk of spectrum, I could get all of the signals that it's producing on 2 meters, which would be kind of fun. But a lot of the software-defined radios don't work. And you need something like a FunCube dongle, which operates from 60 megahertz up to some huge number. I forget, 1.4 gigahertz, or maybe it's even higher than that.
And what is? I don't even know what the FunCube.
FunCube dongle. It's an interesting project. I find out about all these crazy things by surfing online, and then I think everybody knows about them. AMSAT UK is trying to produce a new amateur radio satellite called the FunCube, and it's going to be there's this type of satellite called a CubeSat, and they are all supposed to be they're about 4 inches cubical, so they're just little tiny boxes.
That's cute.
And the thing that's cool about them, they're used a lot for educational, like at universities in programs that deal with space electronics or satellites. They'll build actually one of these, and then they're fairly cheap to launch, so they get launch time, and they basically have a little. It's almost like one of those things that throws skeets out. It has like a spring-loaded arm that just sort of hurls a whole bunch of them off at once, and they just kind of go off into whatever orbit they want. It's pretty easy to get launch time for these educational projects, and so maybe for $100,000 or so, one of these things could get launched. Anyway, both AMSAT UK and AMSAT NA, the North American branch, I think, are working on different CubeSat projects. But anyway, AMSAT UK, to fund theirs, decided they wanted to create a radio that could be used by, sort of kids in school and people who are just trying to become more educated about radio. So they made a little USB gadget that's just like a little USB dongle that receives signals from, like I say, 60 megahertz, which is just above the 6 meter band in amateur radio, all the way up to 1.4 or 1.8. I don't remember what the upper limit is. And so you just attach an antenna and plug it into your radio, and then you run some software-defined radio software, and you can tune it around, and it works pretty well. I've had some problem with it on 2 meters. The selectivity isn't all that great. So if you have, it turns out that the sensitivity isn't really great for me unless I use a preamp, which I happen to have. And that made it a little more bulky. And so that's actually been why I haven't really done as much with it yet as I want to. But it's a pretty cool little gadget, and it's much like the I have a software-defined radio that I bought, which is a SDR-IQ. It's made by rfspace.com, and that receives down in the lower frequencies, way below that, from 0 to 30 megahertz. So,
yeah, that one I've heard of.
Yeah, the same software, actually. They just recently, I use this SDR radio software with it, and they just recently got that working with the FunCube dongle. So apparently they've sold a lot of them, and I guess they've now managed to get a radio manufacturer to actually pick them up, and so they may actually be more available. It costs about $150 for that little gadget, which is pretty reasonable, actually.
Very cool.
I think software-defined radio is you're going to see a lot more things like that, which are frequency agile. It can receive over long wide bandwidths and
now that we've got the processors up to the speed that they can do it, that it just makes sense.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people in ham radio who are kind of look at the increasing amount of computerization we have as somehow being bad or something. I don't know. Perhaps they fear they're still perhaps in the mode where they're fearing EMP from Russian nukes more than actually more realistic threats to life's existence, or maybe they just don't.
Purists? I don't know.
They just don't feel like they can grok the new world of software-defined radio. But I think software-defined radio is amazing technology and has a lot of things to offer. I mean, Jerry's not so recent, but her software-defined radio she did for Element 14. Was really, really cool because it showed that you really don't actually need a laptop or anything to process the signals. You just need, you do need some compute hardware, but not necessarily a laptop. And I think that's good. I think you're going to start seeing that technology in more embedded applications, even because there are other advantages.
I think the simplicity of something like a single tube receiver is a beautiful thing, and I wouldn't mind
absolutely.
Building a couple myself, but I think that SDR definitely is a very logical way to proceed from here.
Well, I mean, I am by no means a lot of the projects I do. I mean, I'm still fascinated by crystal radios. You can't get more basic than that. I think that there's all sorts of things to be learned. If your primary goal is to learn, I think that there are lots of you can go through sort of the history of radio and make that your sort of your guide to how to learn about radio. That may not be the best way, but it's certainly a way, and it's certainly an interesting way. I think you learn a lot about. And I've kind of got this general philosophy about that kind of thing is that when you go back and you look at what people did throughout history of engineering or electronics or computers or whatever, you do learn stuff, you just got to recognize, sort of what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. Software-defined radio, I've been actually thinking about this because there's been hints that if I go through all sorts of old radio stuff that I have, and there's been people who hinted at the possibilities of this kind of, they're sort of, you can view them as type of direct conversion receiver. I don't know. Have we talked about this before, Addie, about direct conversion receivers, down conversion? We haven't talked about mixing too much.
Yeah, I don't
But
think so.
the basic ideas are pretty simple, actually. And if you kind of think about it in the right way, software-defined radio is really no different than making a certain kind of direct conversion receiver, which are among the simpler ones that you could build. And certainly probably among the simpler ones that you can build with good performance. And there's been lots of work recently on making better and better performing direct conversion receivers. I think that's all interesting. I mean, perhaps it's a little specific in terms of a topic, but
Well, I think from what I've done research-wise in terms of like software-defined stuff or anything involving computers, like the terminal node controllers, I think it is.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they may involve a computer, but everything before the computer is extremely analog.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
I mean, there's
So
I mean, in some sense, the analog digital distinction has always been kind of, phony
Fuzzy,
in a way.
yeah.
I always try to explain it to people as there's no such thing as digital. Digital is just a very fast, very boring analog signal.
Yeah, digital is basically the version of electronics that people who are in computer science like myself think they understand, right? And everything else, if you don't take any EE, you think that digital really exists. And I think that analog electronics, certainly the way that
It's been
my
portrayed, I guess.
admittedly limited understanding of radio design, which is getting better over time. That's sort of one of the things I've been trying to school myself on. But my limited understanding is really makes me appreciate the kinds of designs that people do. And really it's like, we've worked through a number of schematics that are very simple and just, how do people design these things and how does this really work? And, what does it mean in terms of, power consumption and linearity and all these other sorts of interesting topics. And they all pay off in radio design.
Yeah.
Long before you digitize your signal. I mean, at some level, all software-defined radios do a whole bunch of stuff and then feed into an analog to digital converter, right? And everything that happens before that is
pure,
can be pretty magical for somebody who doesn't understand radio design.
Me.
Well, I mean,
Working on it, right?
You understand more than
exactly, right?
most people.
No apologies. It took everybody, it took a long time for humanity to come up with a radio, so the fact that it takes you a long time to understand it, I wouldn't be particularly concerned about.
Yeah. And just to let everybody know, so you guys all know my foray into ham radio, but Brainwagon is like the best Elmer in the world. The best.
Well, what's kind of cool about it is when you ask questions which you think are sometimes stupid or silly or basic, I actually often realize, I don't think I really quite understand what's going on. And then I go back in and have to think about it. And usually I can come up with what I hope to be the right solution. But
You do. It
I think
always enlightens me.
Yeah, but it's enlightening to me as well. I think we sort of employ the Socratic method, I think, right? We ask questions back and forth of each other, and that clarifies it as much for the teacher, I think, as for the student. So I really enjoy it. If anybody hasn't dodged into savage circuits and engaged in some of this stuff, you should give it a try sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have a good time in there discussing all sorts of interesting
crazy
questions.
Stuff,
yeah. Me getting flustered, but
seems
why?
like every day somebody's got some sort of question they want to figure out the answer to.
Right.
Yeah, and I think we try to be patient, right? Because I think we realize that everybody starts at sort of a different place, and everybody has different. I always try and think that people have different interests and different capabilities, but that anybody who's trying to learn anything, you got to give them some respect and some props and just be patient. If you can't do that, then you should just be quiet and let somebody who's more patient deal with it, because I've learned so much from my interactions with people, actually even over the web, or not even pre-web. I'll tell a somewhat boring story, but the interesting thing was I was in a computer science program at University of Oregon in, let's say, early 80s. And I became interested in computer graphics, which was kind of interesting because I took one computer graphics course in my entire life, and it was incredibly boring. We spent like 3 weeks on drawing lines or something. It was just so slow and so boring, and just they almost sucked all my enthusiasm out. But I remember going to a computer graphics show that was held in Eugene, Oregon. And then I started reading SIGGRAPH proceedings, which were all about computer graphics. And I read some of the first papers on ray tracing. And back then it was just Usenet for electronic communication, which I'm not going to explain it to all you. Google it if you really need to know what Usenet was all about. And I started exchanging email with a couple of people, guys like Eric Haynes, who's one of the co-authors of the book Real-Time Rendering. Some people might have heard of that. And Craig Kolb, who's been at a number of places. And so we started exchanging email, and we had a little email group, and I wrote some ray tracing software and started put that on the old ComSources Unix email list and or news group. And so that really is what got me started. My interactions with people online actually created a career for me, a career that's been pretty valuable and pretty amazing. Without their help, I doubt I would have gotten anywhere. So you never know how things are going to turn out. So I always think that if I can inspire or educate or get educated in a new field, I think it's really, really cool. And so that's kind of what Brainwagon is supposed to be about in a way. I mean, that's sort of the meta reason for having it, is just that I kind of want to perpetuate that and see if I can make lightning strike a few more times with people. And
now, okay, so that actually was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Brainwagon, where does that come from?
A friend of mine who's now at Google, Tom Lokovic, used to be a coworker of mine at Pixar, came in one day and he proclaimed that he had registered the domain Monkey Speak. And I thought Monkey Speak was an awesome name. And I go, how did you come up with that? And he says, well, I just wanted to have a domain that was easy to spell. And so I took two common words that I thought were cool and I jammed them together and checked to see whether they were available. And then, and so I just sat there brainstorming for like 15 minutes, came up with Brainwagon, looked it up. Nope. Nobody mentioned Brainwagon. So that was it. Later on, I sent a request to the Monsters by Mail. I forget the guy's name. There's an artist who who will draw zombies and monsters and stuff for you to spec. You can send him like $30 and he draws you a nice zombie. And so he made me the nice little zombie logo that I use to the left of my... Which
is, just so appropriate for ZombieTech.
Just to elaborate here, if you haven't been to brainwagon.org, the icon is of a, somewhat suave zombie pulling a wagon completely full of brains.
Yeah.
Which is
great. It really doesn't have much significance other than just being, sort of easy. People know how to spell it when you say. So, but it's kind of cool. I always thought something with brain in it was always kind of cool. Because I always think of anyway, for whatever reason, I think it's appropriate. It's served me well.
It's a great name.
I get about 300 readers a day from what I can tell from my Google Analytics, and I realized a while ago that that's more people than I talk to probably in a year in any other way. So, I'm obviously, I don't know it's hard to measure what kind of impact you're having on people, but I've been doing it for about 7 or 8 years now. I forget, about 3,500 posts or thereabouts.
And you used to have your own podcast too.
Yeah. Years ago, I kind of, again, I tinker with various bits of technology, and I was kind of interested in the possibilities of recording a show. I've got those archived on archive.org. If anybody's interested, I listen to them now and I kind of wince because some of them are kind of painful. But I was really into the idea early on. Within a few months of people sort of coining the phrase, I was recording a podcast. I recorded about 98 episodes. A lot of them just me talking to myself in the car. I think the sort of dual host and getting guests in, I never really did that myself, and I think that's ultimately what limited my productivity in that regard. I eventually just kind of
right before we started, Addie was asking me if she thought you were going to be, able to fill up an hour, and I said, well, Brainwagon did used to do a podcast where he didn't have guests on, and if he can talk to himself for an hour, imagine what he can
I'm
do
not
with
sure
friends.
whether that's actually a positive on my part. I'm not sure whether I need therapy. No, I'm not exactly sure that that's a good thing, but certainly my wife always indicates that I'm somewhat talkative, but
You're awesome.
I'm enthusiastic about the kinds of things that I'm enthusiastic about. I really like, I've been really attracted to people like yourselves who are trying to talk about what they're passionate about. And I think one of my taglines I used for a while was I'm an enthusiast for enthusiasm. If you're enthusiastic about what you're doing, I'm probably enthusiastic alongside with you, because I think that enthusiasm is a underrated quality.
You're like the best type of human, Mark VandeWettering.
I'm like the which type?
The best type of human.
Oh, well, that's perhaps overstating it, but I do okay. I enjoy lots of kinds of interesting stuff. I wish I got, the challenge that I always face is actually getting stuff done. I think that sometimes I think I read way too much and sort of observe what other people are doing way too much and don't spend enough time doing it. I'm hoping to get back into doing it. When I was teaching telescope making, I did that every week, and so I always felt like I was productive. Now that I'm not doing that so much, I need to kind of figure out a regular schedule so I can get some projects done and start feeling good about stuff. But
well, you were talking about potentially doing a ham radio podcast, right?
Yeah, I've sort of been thinking about that. I've been listening to. I did a sort of blog post about this, but for people who don't read my blog yet, I've been listening to Ham Nation, which is one of Leo Laporte's Twit Network shows that stars Bob Heil and a variety of other guests, Gordon
West, yeah.
Yep.
And
George.
George.
They're trying to be enthusiastic. They're trying to bring people into ham radio, but I actually I'm kind of, I don't know, irritated is the right word, but I just feel kind of disappointed that a lot of the approach that they're using is just to kind of spoon feed people tiny little bits of things, like telling you that it's easy and that it's, that it's the best hobby in the world, and just sort of repeating that rather than actually showing you what's the cool thing about ham radio. What I try and do in like even my little AMSAT posts that I've done recently is I want you to hear what I hear. I want you to experience a little bit of what it is for me to go out and record these things and listen to satellites and to decode slow scan television. And I haven't gone into as much detail as perhaps I could, but the idea is to inspire you, not by telling you how great it is, but by trying to show you. Yeah. And I kind of wish there was more ham radio stuff out there that did that. Mm-hmm. I do like there is a couple of hot ham radio podcasts I do like. I do like Ham Nation. Okay, it's okay, but it's I don't often feel stimulated by it. I feel that it's something I can listen to on the car and whatever.
But I'm the target audience, not so much you. I mean, you're an extra class ham already, so
Yeah, but I somehow think that you would be more stimulated by a more challenging program than that.
I don't know. I honestly, I kind of watch it more for Bob Heil than I do for the ham content, because I'm sort of a Bob Heil fan to begin with.
Certainly, and there's obvious reasons to be a Bob Heil fan, but I don't know. I just have my own spin on it. I haven't figured out yet how to turn the basic idea of what I would like to see more of into a podcast that would actually, be able, where I could do, 20 shows a year or 12 shows a year or whatever it would be. In some ways, I'm not socially as plugged into that community as I could be, because while I am a licensed radio amateur, I actually spend relatively little time talking about ham radio, doing ham radio communications. I actually have mostly been doing construction and sort of theory and sort of the sciencey aspects of it. So I don't know. I mean, I've thought about doing it. If anybody's interested and appreciate the kinds of things that I've been blogging about, but perhaps could bring a different perspective and would like to collaborate on it, they can contact me. Brainwagon@gmail.com would be great, and maybe we could come up with something.
That'd be awesome.
But I haven't. Yeah, that's sort of on the back burner. A ham radio project I would like to do, and which I've got about half the equipment for, is I've been meaning to do a high altitude balloon launch. We're getting toward the end of the summer season, where perhaps it'd be easier to do. But I've been really amazed at the kinds of pictures people have been bringing back from high altitude balloon launches, and I've got some trackers and some. I've got about half the equipment that I need. All the sort of non-balloon stuff, and it'd be fun to do something like that. And so if anybody was interested in doing that in the Bay Area, I'd also be interested, or serving as a mentor for me, since I've never done it. It would be cool to do.
Well, I think some of the ones that have been launched have better pictures than AMSATs.
Yeah, well, obviously, the thing that's sort of wacky about AMSAT is that they're sending down slow scan television, which is pretty low resolution. It's only 320 by 240 or so. A lot of the what I really want to launch is something like a one of those GoPro high def video cameras, because I think cool. those are really doing a great job. I've seen a number of people have lofted those, and they seem to be really good, keeping the exposure good and providing really great imagery, and that'd be a blast. I have some old cameras that I wouldn't mind losing that I could send up, but I figure it'll cost me a few $100 to launch one, depending on exactly what the payload is.
Sure.
And if you have an 80% chance of recovering the payload, then you have to grimace a little, and when you launch it, in the hopes that you will actually be able to recover the payload,
right.
That it won't land in the river somewhere or whatever. But people seem to have pretty good
luck with
capabilities. Yeah. As long as you do your homework.
Or behind a fence with a really big dog.
Yeah, well, those you can usually, you go knock on the door and you say, can we retrieve our
balloon
payload?
And may I also have a signed baseball, please?
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, you're out of here before too long. You're going off to a game today, aren't you?
Yeah, the wife picked up some tickets for us to go see the A's. Baseball is actually another sort of slightly geeky hobby that I like to do. I'm kind of an Oakland A's fan, which is more difficult this year than perhaps in previous years. But
how long does it take to get out to Oakland from where you are?
Oh, we got to stop and pick up some stuff on the way out, and so we usually park at a BART station and then take the BART in. But I think today we're going to drive it probably about 25 minutes or so. It's not too bad.
Now, how much time do we have left?
Oh, we got a couple minutes yet.
Okay, I have another question.
Awesome.
Okay, zombie apocalypse. What are your? I guess I have two questions. What three tools would you bring? And two, besides obviously running over people and having money, what do you think is the most important thing to get set up?
Let's see. What three tools? Okay, we'll try and do this. You obviously need something to whack zombies. I don't believe in guns, actually, because you'll run out of ammunition unless you're like really completely psycho and have stockpiled tons and tons of ammunition. That's really not my style, and it's not clear that. It's also not clear that you can really, hit,
kill them.
Take out the zombies in the head. It always seems to take like all the movie guys like 6 bullets to the chest before they realize they have to go to the head. So I think the Simon Pegg cricket bat idea seemed to be pretty good.
Agree. Yeah. Only problem is you got to get pretty close to them.
Yeah. Well, so that's the other thing. Yeah, speed. You got to get away from them. So I think something like a motorcycle is exactly what you need to get away from zombies.
Okay.
And let's see. Other than that, what else would be good?
Bad bike and
Molotov cocktails, I think, are probably the good idea. So lots of bottles full of kerosene or gasoline or whatever. That would probably be my survival strategy.
Excellent.
And then what was the other part of the question?
And then what is the, like, at your destination, which would be the toy maker house, you know, what would be the most important thing to set up, do you think?
Well, if we're facing the normal George Romero type zombies as opposed to the legend type zombies, where I am legend zombies, which move fast and are really, really hostile, I think it's just a question of barriers, right? You just need to board up all the windows, board up everything, you know, and make sure that you're secure, and make sure you secure, you know, water and food and all that kind of stuff, and you know, last it out until they rot away into nothing, right? That's basically.
I wonder if they progressively rot.
Well, certainly that was the. I'm actually a bit of a fan of zombie movies, so I've watched a lot. 28 Days Later, right? They eventually sort of, when they don't eat anything, they just eventually sort of shamble around and croak.
Oh. Well,
So,
then we can starve them to death.
Basically, yeah. So you just have to outlast them. So.
And then there's the opposite of that would be the little novel Feed, where it's 15 years later and the zombies are still around, and humans have sort of walled off areas, and they just sort of go about life dealing with it.
Yeah, that's kind of a trickier thing. In that case, becoming the grand ruler by virtue of money and equipment seems like the better way to go. But I've never really aspired to be a despot, so I'm not. What is it? Land of the Dead with Dennis Hopper and John Leguizamo. Dennis Hopper plays the chief. I never really aspired to be him in that movie, so.
Gotcha.
I don't know. We'll just see. I'm sure
you barely have enough time for hacking now. I mean, having to be in charge, that's just gonna cut down the hacking time even further.
Yeah, leadership is a tricky thing. You have, when you spend all your time bossing people around, you don't actually have much time to do the kinds of things that I normally enjoy. So it can be a positive. I enjoy it sometimes, but I also enjoy the technical aspects of just hacking around, and I enjoy reading about people who are hacking and doing cool projects and stuff like that.
Cool.
So,
very cool.
So how long have I really been talking?
We got like a couple minutes yet here. We'll wrap things up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm staring at my totally messy desk, which some of you have seen on my Ustream channel, which I occasionally kick on. And
it's inspiring.
It's inspiring. It's a mess is what it is.
Watch Mark start to try to clean up his home office a couple of weeks ago, and some of the random stuff that this guy has is just off the wall. It's great.
It's epic.
Well, right now I've got my. I was trying to record a video of the Atari 2600 Enigma machine that I built, and so I've got my Atari and a color TV set up on my bench. But I've also got lots of just generic crap. I was trying to find a serial terminal the other day and found a whole bunch of diodes instead. So.
Did you end up trying to fire that serial terminal up?
Yeah, it fires up. It's got some kind of horizontal sweep oscillator or something's wonky. It doesn't have a stable image. It seems like it mostly works.
Did you try hitting the side of it?
I've been thinking about opening it up and electrocuting myself, but we'll see how that goes. I don't have a huge amount of confidence in my ability to restore it to working condition.
I'm telling you, man, just whack it on the side.
I do actually do that considerably, but I whack computers on the side when I have a software problem too, so it doesn't often work as well. And I still have the LOL shield that I soldered together is still sitting on my desk mocking me with its malfunction. Yeah. So I got to figure out what's going on with that someday. And I got
you've got your game Duino that.
Yeah, I still haven't done a game Duino thing. I actually have an idea for a game Duino sort of demo that I might try to tinker together. I've got a conference coming up with some fellow enthusiasts where such a thing might be appreciated, so I gotta think about maybe doing something for that. I'm sure I'll blog about it if I do. And I'm just staring at a pile of crap. I got all sorts of good parts and stuff, and it really is. There's no easier time than today to become a. People used to say that homebrew electronics is kind of dead, but with the surfacing of lots of small companies like SparkFun and stuff, and also just the fact that you can order parts from DigiKey or Tata or all sorts of different places means that it's actually really easy to get started in electronics if you're willing to order parts over the internet.
Yep.
So I have tons and tons and tons of good stuff that you guys have helped me find, and also just stuff that I've acquired. And like I bought 20 Electret mics the other day just for fun, just so I'd have a bunch.
That's awesome.
And they were 25 cents a piece from Tata.
Yep.
So that's kind of cool.
Gotta love Tata.
Yeah, Eddie was the one who actually found Tata while we were looking for something.
Super cheap,
And
awesome
now
stuff.
everybody's shopping there. I think they owe
Yeah.
us some money. I'm gonna have to call
Well,
them.
the problem is they hardly make. I mean, you can get, I think, the 555 timers I got from them for 13 cents a piece or some ridiculous thing. It's like,
It was awesome.
holy crap. You know?
Such
you know,
a great place. I
100
don't
of
want
them is
too many
$13.
people to
Okay,
find
well.
out about it because you know that they can't have that big of a stock at those prices. So,
Right.
don't buy everything out, guys, because that's where we shop.
Yeah, exactly. We leave some for us.
Yeah. We're doing you a favor by telling you. You got to leave some. So let's see. If you want to follow along with Mark's varying, wide range of interests, I would definitely recommend reading his blog at brainwagon.org. How I usually get to his articles is actually on Twitter. I follow him at Brainwagon, and because you never know what he's going to be blogging about. One day it'll be something interesting, and the next day it'll be so esoteric. I'm like, whatever. Yeah, I'm not reading that
I get
crap.
that a lot. My relatives, my Twitter feed gets echoed onto Facebook, where a lot of my relatives follow me, and their universal response is, "What the hell are you talking about?" I have no clue as to what this is supposed to be about. I'm sure you're enthused about it, but wow. They just have no clue. So
And
Yeah.
there's also YouTube /Brainwagon.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yep.
correct? Excellent.
Yep. I try and post. Usually, if I post something on YouTube, I try and have a post on my blog to point at it. I find that if I just put it on YouTube, I don't get a lot of hits from it. Not a lot of people apparently subscribe to YouTube, but you certainly can. And if you do the same kinds of projects, or sort of have the same sort of approach to whatever passions you have, I'm always interested in adding new reading material to my list. So. Feel free to communicate. I really love it when people post comments on my blog. I've been trying to respond more individually to comments. Haven't been perfect at it, but if one of my projects makes you think of a different project, or one that you've done, or one that somebody else has done, let me know. I'm totally into learning about stuff. So
Cool.
Yeah. I wanted to take just a second here to thank all you listeners that went over and subscribed and followed John S. from last week's show. He was bragging to me earlier today about how many more of you there are now over there watching and listening to his stuff. So thanks for going over there and checking out his stuff.
Yep.
yeah, all the subscribes you get really provide enthusiasm for people who are trying to blog about stuff. I sometimes think I'm talking into the vapor, and it really makes you feel good when somebody subscribes or comments or stuff. So you can have an influence on people just by patting them on the head a little bit. So
Yep.
it's cool. And John's blog is really cool.
Yeah.
So
That's his
John's
Brainwagons.
stuff.
Well, that pretty much wraps it up for today. If you want to check out our stuff, it's follow us at TYMKRS or TYMKRS.com. And as always, you can download these podcasts at feeds.tymkrs.com.
Cool.
So that's it for us today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys again next Thursday.
Yep. And thanks to Brainwagon for joining us.
Yes.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for hanging out with us, Mark. We'll probably have you on
do it
again
again.
in a few weeks here.
Oh, yes.
Always a pleasure.
Talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.